This video is brought to you by Nebula. It's fair to say the UK's economy is far from ideal right now. Inflation is still high, the economy is still teetering on the edge of recession, and energy bills are still being subsidised by the government. One thing the government is doing to try and improve the state of the economy is getting older people back into work. The government noticed that an increasing number of older people have retired early and are now economically inactive. As such, Jeremy Hunt, the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, has a new plan to try and get these people back into the workforce. So let's have a look at these plans, what they could change, and whether they could succeed in stimulating the economy by getting older people back out of retirement and into work. We're going to split this video into three parts. First, we're going to have a look at the data on why older people are leaving the workforce. Second, we're going to explain why this is bad news for the economy, before finally looking at how the government is planning on addressing this, and whether it'll work. So let's start by looking into the data on older people becoming economically inactive. It's worth explaining here that economically inactive simply means people who are not in work and not seeking work. For older people, this is usually because either they've retired early and have started taking their pension, or they're ill and no longer able to work. The government can't really do much about people getting ill, at least not with economic incentives, so Hunt's plan largely focuses on the former. Between August and October 2022, there were 8,935,000 economically inactive 16 to 64-year-olds across the UK, a rise of almost 500,000 since the start of COVID. A large portion of this rise actually comes from people who have sought an early retirement. It seems that many older people decided, following the pandemic, that it was time to get out, with there being some evidence that this decision came on the back of increased stress at work on the back of the pandemic. For example, the Over 50s Lifestyle Study found that 15% of respondents cited the COVID pandemic as the reason for leaving work. During the pandemic, those in industries that couldn't open were provided with furlough payments. Following the pandemic, these industries stopped receiving furlough payments, and many were forced to close, leading to redundancies. For those that had saved up enough to afford an early retirement, this is what they did. In addition to the COVID factor, 10% said they left the workforce because they wanted a change in lifestyle. There are reasons why the current tax situation incentivises people to leave early, which we'll get onto later, but basically a number of people leave the workforce each year because it seems financially prudent to do so. So this is why an increased number of older people are leaving the workforce, largely because of the impact of the COVID pandemic and because of so-called lifestyle reasons. So let's move on to the second part of this video and have a look at the reasons why this is bad for the economy. Primarily, this means that we have fewer experienced, talented and skilled people in a variety of vital jobs. Take doctors as an example. The NHS is already in a tricky position right now, and having the most skilled people leaving the organisation more than a decade earlier than expected is not going to help it. And this is true in all areas of the country and in all sectors of employment. This means the workforce is composed of fewer experienced workers, and it also means that new members of staff will have less access to a skilled employee to learn from. Additionally, it means fewer people paying tax, such as income tax, and more people taking money out of the state through provisions such as pensions. The impact this has on the economy doesn't end here either. According to a House of Lords report, an increase in economically inactive older people also exacerbates the current inflationary challenge. Ultimately, this is because older people tend to be big spenders. This inflationary challenge is what's primarily driving the cost of living crisis. So it makes sense why Rishi Sunak's government is trying to tackle the issue, given his focus on trying to improve the economy. So finally, let's have a look at the changes Sunak's government is making in order to discourage older people from becoming economically inactive. There are basically three pension rules in play that would affect an individual's decision on whether to leave or continue working. First, the lifetime allowance, second, the annual allowance, and third, the money purchase annual allowance. The lifetime allowance relates to the amount of money an individual can save in their pension before it's highly taxed. Currently, the lifetime allowance stands at £1,073,100. Basically, any money saved over that will be taxed highly, in some instances at rates of up to 55%, when it's withdrawn from a pension or based on a mandatory HMRC test when someone turns 75. The annual allowance is the yearly limit of contributions people can make to their pension each year. This differs based on the type of pension, but the overall input limit is currently £40,000 gross per year. The Money Purchase Annual Allowance, or MPAA, relates to one type of pension in particular, invested pension. This is a little more complicated, so we'll just stick with the main points. Put very simply, MPAA restricts how much money someone can put back into their invested pension after they've started taking money out of it, say if they decided to go back to work after retiring. Currently, it's capped at £4,000 gross per year. Anyway, the government is changing these three rules to try and encourage people to stay in or return to work. First, the government has announced that this lifetime allowance limit will be scrapped next year, meaning that people will be able to keep accumulating a pension fund without penalty. Second, the government has also announced that the annual allowance will be increased from £40,000 to £60,000. This means that potential retirees can now add more input to their respective pension plans each year, which helps to reduce tax and provides a higher value to fund their retirement without the higher taxes we discussed earlier. Third, the MPAA has been increased to £10,000 per year, which further allows those who have already effectively retired and started to take money from their pensions to return to work, as they can continue to build a fund with no lifetime allowance limit and receive tax relief on £10,000 worth of contributions, not just £4,000 like before. Altogether, the government hopes that it will be able to reverse the trend of older people leaving the workforce. If that's not enough TLDR for one day, then you ought to check out our series This Week in Parliament, which has just made a magnificent return. That's not a quote or something, it's just a thing I'm saying. This Week in Parliament is the show where we run down exactly what happened in Parliament in the preceding week, breaking down the debates, laws and bills which otherwise you'd totally miss, and explaining what really happens in Britain's seat of power when you brush aside all the shouting and arm waving. New episodes come out every week, only on Nebula. But that's not all. There's also the extended version of the Daily Briefing every single weekday, a bunch of exclusive explainer videos, some silly fun content, and all of our videos totally ad-free. It's not just TLDR either. We're joined by a bunch of your favourite creators, from Wendover and Real Life Law to Johnny Harris. Which means there's a whole load of exclusive videos, early access to loads of creators, and all the ad-free viewing you can handle. Signing up using our link in the description gets you access for just $2.50 a month, and is the absolute best way to support the channel. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you on Nebula.